book jackets. And he's also the author of the new book, Go, Kid's Guide to Graphic Design. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you.
Uh, Tell us about the new book. What are you trying to communicate to children about graphic design?
Well, about 3 years ago, I was approached by a wonderful designer and artist and writer, a woman named Raquel Jaramillo, who's probably better known to the writing public as R.J. Palacio, the author of Wonder, though not at the time. And she said, you know, I had this idea for a project, and I think somebody should make a book to teach graphic design to kids, and I think it should be you. And I was kind of surprised because I don't have kids, I don't really relate to kids, and I don't particularly like them. But I thought, well, this puts me out of my comfort zone, so that's a good thing, and let's give it a shot. But one of the other, for me, really motivating factors was, as far as I knew, no such book existed. And we sort of, you know, researched that out just to kind of make sure. Because if it did, I certainly didn't know about it. And I try to keep on top of these things. So that was a very attractive thing to me was, okay, this is in its own way uncharted territory. And, you know, therefore there's a hole that kind of needs filling. So then it became an issue of, all right, so exactly what do you want to teach them? Because I didn't really learn about graphic design until I was in college. And lots of aspects of it were a huge revelation to me, but especially learning the history of it. And, you know, the history of graphic design contains a lot of things, frankly, that aren't appropriate for children. So, you know, I had to think about pulling back and not really going into political propaganda, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes very basic, you know, breaking graphic design down into its essential components: form, what something looks like; content, what it says or what it means; typography, let's learn about the history of the written word and typefaces and why they exist the way they are. And oh, by the way, do you realize that the written word is one of the most important inventions in human history? And then putting it all together in service of a problem, basically. You know, okay, so here's the problem. You have a bunch of people in a room, in a public space, and you need to create a sign so that if they need to leave it right away, they can easily find the sign and know where to do this. So how do you design an exit sign? And so I show an example of, you know, one with really hard to read curly Q type, but that's very pretty. And then show what we've come to know basically universally as the, you know, the red block letters, no nonsense, very clear, and in its own way kind of beautiful, but in a much different way than trying to make it decorative. So so conceptual thinking, which is very important. And then at the end we created sort of 10 projects or exercises for readers to try their hand at this form called graphic design.
I didn't learn about graphic design until I was out of college. You know, as a liberal arts major, I learned about literature, art, sculpture, architecture. But graphic design was like the art that was invisible. We
Right.
took it for granted.
Right.
But it is the equal of those other arts, I now know. Could you speak about that for a minute?
Well, I think that's also part of the goal of the book is to get you know, the reader, whether it's kids or adults or whatever, to understand that, you know, this isn't made by a machine. It's printed on a machine, but it doesn't make itself. Somebody had to make all the choices of the typeface and spacing and etc. And that it's not just pushing a button. And you know, that said, there are plenty of examples of graphic design that is frankly sort of bad because it's ineffective, like I was saying about you know, a curly Q exit sign, or or just simply formally not appealing. And so it's if you're going to be making this stuff, it helps to learn how to make it well.
Yeah, so much utilitarian or seemingly utilitarian design is actually beautiful, and we don't see it sometimes until later. I'm thinking of the advertising design of the 1950s, which now just to me looks so beautiful.
Yeah.
And is it okay for people to not be aware of this and just go about their business not knowing how important graphic design is to their daily lives?
Is it okay? I mean, it's sort of been okay for most of human history, but I think it certainly helps you to kind of navigate the world if you know sort of how you're either being people are attempting to manipulate you, or just trying to do it badly. I think it helps to have a better awareness of it, certainly.
And it also gives an additional layer of potential aesthetic pleasure, recognizing
Yes.
good design.
Yeah.
How did you become a designer, Chip?
I sort of wanted to be a cartoonist. Then I wanted to go into television, and then I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania, so for me, Penn State was sort of the 13th grade. You know, I just didn't even think about it. I just knew that I wanted to go to school there. And it turns out that they did at the time, and to this day, had a really, really great but very concentrated graphic design program there. So in a school that big, you know, many tens of thousands of kids on campus, they would allow only 20 into the major every year, with like 3 full-time faculty, and I just kind of chanced into that. And I studied graphic design as an undergrad for 4 years. And the other great thing about the program there is that you can't get it as a BFA. In other words, you have to take all of your other classes that frankly you might not want to, like math and science and you know, a second language and psychology and all these things, but they're great because they inform. I mean, graphic designers negotiate the world. So the more you know about the real world, the better off you are.
And how did you get into publishing, designing?
I mean, I really backed into it. I knew I wanted to work in New York City, and I knew I wanted to be making graphic design for a living. And so what I really initially tried was interviewing at the big graphic design firms, Pentagram, Milton Glaser, Pushpin, and everybody was very encouraging, but nobody had an entry-level position at the time. And then Random House did, and I thought, well, books wasn't really what I was thinking of concentrating on, but I love books, and it wouldn't hurt to do this for a couple of years and see what happens. So.
And the rest is.
And then I just passed my 27th year.
What goes into producing a book jacket from the designer's point of view? What do you have to think about to make an effective and beautiful dust jacket?
You know, all books are different, but I think you have to be able to kind of weigh, you know, who the author is, what they're trying to say, how they're trying to say it. But then you also have the publisher, because they have a lot to say about it as well. And so you're kind of striking a balance between the two. And you basically want to create a piece of visual iconography that is going to get people to read the book. So it's kind of complicated because it's creating a certain kind of piece of art, if you will, but it's in service to a greater piece of art, which is the writing. And you know, I think it's, as much as publishing is changing and transitioning, I think one of the things that everybody seems to still be able to agree on is that all books, no matter what form they are, need a cover.
Oh, so many questions arise from that. But first I want to ask if you can tell me 2, 3, 4, 5 of the dust jackets that either you're most proud of, or which most clearly show your style?
Well, clearly show my style. I mean, frankly, I've kind of very much avoided having any kind of signature style, I would say. I'd say it's more of kind of a sensibility. I tend to go more minimal than maximal. I was taught to, if you have a design with a certain amount of components on the page or the picture plane and it's not working for you, take one away. Now, do you miss it? And if you don't, then take another one away and keep going until there's just enough there. The one everybody cites is Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. Production-wise, two of the most I'm most proud of are The Secret History by Donna Tartt, and more recently 1Q84 by Haruki Murakami. And the other thing that's kind of worth noting, I guess, is that most of what I work on in terms of book design are hardcover first editions. So that's a kind of rarefied thing in a way. So I sort of have the certain luxuries of, certain kinds of materials and what have you. But I'm very mindful of the fact that I'm making something that by its very nature is not meant to be thrown away. Really, really important.
And that's as opposed to mass market paperbacks?
Well, mass market paperbacks are, it just, you could imagine throwing something like that away. I don't recommend throwing away any, but they seem more disposable.
But there are many paperback books with beautiful...
Yes, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. When albums gave way to CDs, that big canvas was greatly reduced. Is something similar to that happening with books as digital comes along?
Yes and no. I mean, one exercise that I've learned very early on about designing a book cover is like designing it this big, because if it works this big, it's going to look fantastic when it's actual size. So I've been thinking this way for quite some time. But I think it's a little different than album covers because your average book page has stayed the same size. There's a whole other discourse I could do on designing for music, but it was a very mid to late 20th century phenomenon, because music really always existed as pure sound until the 20th century, and then they figured out how to encapsulate it into a thing, and the thing then got that big, 12-inch record, and then it began to shrink again, and then it became pure sound again. And I'm sure this is all TMI, but the book pages by and large remained the same for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah. Chip Kidd, the book is Go, Kid's Guide to Graphic Design. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.